I forgot my phone at the hospital waiting room. That's how all of this started. Something so ordinary, so embarrassing in that getting older kind of way, turned into the moment that unraveled everything I thought I knew about my family. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a licensed electrician, the last 12 of them running my own small contracting business out of Spokane, Washington. I built something real, not flashy, but solid. When I sold the business 3 years ago, I walked away with enough to retire comfortably, keep the house, and still leave something meaningful behind for the people I love, or the people I thought I loved, or the people I thought loved, or, more accurately, the people I thought loved me. My name is Howard, and I need to tell you what happened on a Tuesday morning in March, because I still haven't fully processed it myself, and maybe saying it out loud or putting it into words is the only way I ever will. My son's name is Marcus. He's 34. Married to a woman named Brenda. They've been together about 8 years, married for 5. I never had a problem with Brenda, not a real one. She was a little cold sometimes, a little transactional, but I told myself that was just her personality. Some people aren't warm. That's fine. Marcus always seemed happy. That was enough for me. My wife, Ellen, passed away 9 years ago. Ovarian cancer. 11 months from diagnosis to the end. Marcus was 25 when he lost his mother, and I watched something shift in him after that. He grieved differently than I did. Quieter, more internal. We never quite found our way back to the easy closeness we had before. I blamed myself for that for a long time. I was so lost in my own grief that maybe I wasn't there for him the way I should have been. I don't know. Parents carry a lot of guilt that probably isn't entirely theirs to carry. After Ellen, I remarried. I know that surprises some people, especially when I tell them it happened only 3 years later. Her name was Joan. She was a good woman, a kind woman, and we had 4 years together before we realized we'd both been lonely in similar ways, but wanted different things from that second chapter of life. We divorced without bitterness. She moved to Phoenix. We still exchange Christmas cards. I don't regret it. Not the marriage, not the divorce. Life is complicated and people try their best. Marcus never warmed to Joan. He was polite, barely. When Joan left, I noticed he seemed almost relieved. I filed that away somewhere in the back of my mind and never took it out to examine too closely. My estate is worth somewhere around $1.4 million. The house, investments, the proceeds from the business sale, I worked for every dollar of it. Ellen and I worked for it together, really. She ran the books for the contracting business for the first 18 years before she got sick. Whatever I have, she helped build. My will, as of last winter, left the bulk of it to Marcus. A smaller portion to my sister Lena in Boise. A little to my church. I've been meaning to update it, kept putting it off, the way you put things off when you're not in a hurry and don't want to think about your own mortality. The Tuesday this all happened, I was at Sacred Heart Medical Center for a routine cardiology follow-up. Nothing dramatic. I had a minor cardiac event 2 years ago, a warning shot, and since then I've had regular checkups. My cardiologist, a serious and meticulous man named Dr. Okafor, keeps close watch. I was in the waiting room for about 40 minutes before they called me back, and I'd been killing time scrolling through my phone, reading the news, doing what people do. When the nurse called my name, I stood up, gathered my jacket, and followed her back. The appointment was straightforward. Numbers looked stable. Dr. Okafor adjusted one of my medications slightly, printed out my updated instructions, and I was out in under 30 minutes. It wasn't until I was standing at the elevator, pressing the button for the lobby, that I reached into my jacket pocket and felt nothing. I left my phone on the chair in the waiting room. I went back. The waiting room had turned over. Different people sitting in the chairs now. I scanned the seats and didn't see it. I went to the reception desk, and a young woman, maybe 22 or 23, was standing behind the counter sorting papers. Her name tag said Amber. I explained I'd left my phone, described it black case, small crack in the lower right corner of the screen, and she looked at me for a second with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Sir," she said quietly, "could you come around here for a moment?" I thought she meant the end of the counter, a gap where patients sometimes stood to sign paperwork. But she opened the door beside the desk and gestured me into the back corridor. "I have your phone," she said. "I found it on the chair after you went in with the nurse. I was going to lock it in the lost and found drawer, but then she stopped. She was looking at the floor." "Then what?" I said. She reached into her scrubs pocket and held out my phone. The screen was lit. There was a text message thread open. "I wasn't snooping," she said quickly. "The phone buzzed when I picked it up and the screen turned on. I glanced at it to see if there was an emergency contact, and then I saw what the conversation said, and Her voice caught. "I'm sorry. I didn't know what to do. I almost put it in the drawer anyway." But I kept thinking, if that was my dad. I looked at the screen. It was a text thread between Marcus and Brenda. I want to tell you I read it calmly. I want to tell you I was composed and rational. But my vision actually went a little strange at the edges, the way it does when your blood pressure spikes, which mine does sometimes, which is why I see Dr. Okafor in the first place. The thread had started 2 days earlier. Brenda had texted Marcus, "Did you check what the payout would be, with the house included?" Marcus replied, "Around 1.4. Maybe more if the market keeps going." Brenda, "And the policy?" Marcus, "500K. Double indemnity if accidental." Brenda, "So we're looking at almost 2 million if things go the right way." Then Marcus, "It's not like we'd be doing anything. We'd just wait. Dr. O said his heart is still a concern. Could be 6 months, could be 2 years. We just need to make sure the will doesn't change before then." Brenda, "Has he mentioned updating it?" Marcus, "Not recently. I'm going to make sure he stays happy. More dinners, show up more. Keep him feeling close to us." Brenda, "Good. What about the sister?" Marcus, "Lena won't be an issue. They're not that close. I'll manage it." Brenda, "Okay. But if he ever says anything about a financial advisor or meeting with a lawyer again, tell me immediately." I stood in that corridor and I read those messages 3 times. Then I turned the phone over in my hands and set it face down against my palm because I couldn't look at it anymore. Amber was watching me with wide eyes. "I'm sorry," she said again. "I'm so sorry," she said again. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know if I should say anything, but You did the right thing," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "Thank you. I want to be honest with you about what I felt in that moment, because I think it matters. It wasn't rage. People expect rage, the table flipping, the phone call, the confrontation. What I felt was something more like cold, a full-body coldness, starting from the center of my chest and moving outward, like something had been true for a while, and I hadn't known it, and now I knew, and you can't unknow. I drove home very carefully. I made myself a cup of coffee. I sat at my kitchen table for 2 hours, and I stared at the wall where Ellen's photograph still hangs, her in her yellow sweater, laughing at something off camera, the summer before she got sick. I talked to her for a while. I'm not embarrassed to say that. Then I made some decisions. The first thing I did was call my attorney. His name is Frank. We've known each other for 20 years. He handled the business sale. I told him I needed to come in as soon as possible to discuss updating my will and reviewing my life insurance beneficiaries. He got me an appointment for Thursday. The second thing I did was call my sister Lena. Lena is 61, sharp as a tack, and she has never trusted Marcus's wife. She said it once, a few years ago, and I told her she was being unfair, and she dropped it. She didn't say "I told you so" when I called. She just listened, and then she said, "What do you need me to do?" That's Lena. The third thing I took longer to decide. Marcus called me that same evening right around 6:30, which is when he usually called. Very normal. Very routine. We talked for 20 minutes about nothing. The Mariners' spring training, a plumbing issue he was having, whether I'd watched a show he'd recommended. His voice was warm, attentive. The version of my son that I had believed was the real version, his full and genuine self, expressing actual love for his father. I've thought a lot about that conversation since. About how long he'd been performing warmth for me while calculating the rest, about whether any of it was ever real. The dinners, the calls, the visits. or whether I'd been a figure in a spreadsheet for longer than I knew. I didn't confront him on the phone that night. I didn't want to. I needed to think clearly, and I needed to act carefully, and confronting him while I was still this fragile inside would have meant saying things I hadn't yet decided I wanted to say. I changed my will the following Thursday. Lena is now the primary beneficiary. A significant portion is going to a college scholarship fund in Ellen's name that I've been wanting to set up for years and kept postponing. A smaller amount is going to 2 charities. Marcus's name is still in the document, but for a fraction of what it was before. I also changed my life insurance beneficiaries, not Brenda's concern anymore. I did not call the police. I've thought about this decision more than any other, and I know not everyone will agree with me. What I read in those texts was ugly and calculated and devastating, but it wasn't a plan of action. It was 2 people, greedily and coldly, hoping I would die on a timeline that worked for them. Monstrous, yes. Illegal in the way it sat? I consulted Frank about that too. He agreed it was deeply troubling, but unlikely to meet any criminal threshold as written. Waiting for someone to die isn't a chargeable offense, even when the waiting comes with spreadsheets. I know some people would have gone to Marcus and Brenda immediately and let it be ugly and explosive. I understand that instinct, but here's what I know about myself at 63. I am done performing things I don't feel. I am done with conversations that are theater. When I finally talked to Marcus, and I did, about 3 weeks later, I told him calmly that I had updated my estate plan. I told him I'd done it because I wanted to set up the scholarship while I was alive to see it begin, and because Lena had been more present in my life and I wanted to reflect that. I watched his face very carefully while I said it. I watched things move behind his eyes. He said all the right things. He said, of course, that made sense. He completely understood. We haven't spoken much since then. I haven't called Brenda at all. Whether Marcus eventually figures out what I know, I suppose he will, at some point. Let him sit with that. Now let me tell you about Amber, because she deserves more than a footnote. I went back to Sacred Heart about 10 days after everything happened. I asked for her at the cardiology reception desk. She came out looking a little nervous, like maybe she'd done something wrong. I told her she'd given me a gift. I told her that what she'd seen on that phone was genuinely serious, and that because she'd made the choice to say something instead of staying quiet, which would have been the easier and more self-protective thing to do, I'd been able to protect myself in ways I couldn't have otherwise. I asked if she was a student. She is. 3rd year of nursing school, doing her clinical rotation at Sacred Heart, working 20 hours a week at the reception desk on top of classes and clinicals. No family money, putting herself through school largely on her own. I wrote her a check that day for $12,000, with a letter explaining it was a personal gift to help with school expenses, no strings attached. I know some people think I should have done more, and maybe they're right. I might do more later. For now, I wanted her to be able to breathe a little, to get through the rest of school without counting every dollar. She cried. I'm not too proud to say I did too. A little, standing in that hospital lobby. She told me she'd almost put the phone in the drawer without saying anything. She'd picked it up 3 times. She almost left it alone. I've thought about that version of events, the drawer version, many times since. I probably would have kept sending Marcus money when he asked, kept adjusting my will in his favor, kept taking his warm phone calls as genuine, and died having never known. And maybe that wouldn't have been the worst thing. Maybe I could have died happily deceived, but I don't think so. I think there's something in us, something fundamental that wants to see clearly. Even when seeing clearly is the hardest thing in the world. I'm writing this from my kitchen table. The yellow sweater photograph is still on the wall. Lena is coming to visit next month. First time she's stayed in the house since I don't remember when. I'm going to cook her Ellen's chili recipe, and we're going to sit on the porch and watch the evening come in over the backyard. And it's going to be a good visit. I miss my son. I don't miss who he turned out to be. I'm not sure those are different people, and that's the part I'll probably never fully make peace with. But I'm 63 years old. I own my house. I have my health, more or less. I have my sister. I have a scholarship fund with Ellen's name on it that already has its first applicant, a girl from Spokane who wants to be a nurse. I think Ellen would have liked that very much. I've been sitting with this for a while now, trying to figure out what it actually means. Not just what happened, but what it says about the choices people make and where those choices eventually lead them. Marcus didn't become who he revealed himself to be overnight. That's the part that took me the longest to accept, the coldness in those texts, the arithmetic of it. 1.4 million, double indemnity, 6 months or 2 years. That kind of thinking doesn't appear from nowhere. It builds quietly, over years, fed by something I probably won't ever fully understand. Resentment, maybe. Entitlement. Or simply the decision, made at some point along the way, that money mattered more than the man who earned it. Whatever the root was, he watered it and let it grow, and eventually it became the thing I read on that hospital corridor screen. And here's what I keep coming back to. Actions have weight. Not in any cosmic storybook sense. I don't believe the universe keeps a ledger. But in the very practical, very human sense that what you do shapes who you are, and who you are eventually shows up in your life whether you want it to or not. Marcus made a series of choices. Quietly, privately, he let greed become his compass. And because he did, he lost something he can never get back. Not the inheritance, not the money, but the actual relationship. Whatever real version of a father-son bond we might have rebuilt after Ellen died, that possibility is gone now. Not because I punished him, but because of what he chose to become. Amber made a different kind of choice. She was 22 years old, doing a clinical rotation, working reception to pay for nursing school. She had every reason to put that phone in the drawer and walk away. It was simpler. It was safer. It was none of her business. But she picked it up 3 times and set it back down, and finally, she decided that staying quiet when you've seen something wrong is its own kind of action. That took more courage than most people twice her age would have shown. And because she made that choice, that one quiet, difficult, integrity-driven choice, she changed the outcome of my life. I think about that a lot when I think about what it means to live with intelligence and decency. It's rarely the dramatic moments that define us. It's the small ones, the Tuesday morning, the phone on the chair, the decision to say something or say nothing. Amber chose to say something, and that choice was the product of a character she'd been building her whole life, probably without knowing it. That's what I want people to take from my story, if they take anything at all. Not the betrayal. Betrayal is as old as families and money and fear. But the other half of it, the girl in the nursing scrubs who could have looked the other way and didn't. The 63-year-old man who sat at his kitchen table, looked at a photograph of his late wife, and decided to see clearly instead of comfortably. Clarity cost something. It cost me my idea of who my son was. But I'd rather carry that loss with open eyes than live warmly inside a lie. The scholarship fund has Ellen's name on it now. Lena is coming next month. And somewhere in Spokane, a young woman who wanted to be a nurse is finishing her degree with a little less weight on her shoulders. That feels like the right ending to me.